Hi, and welcome to my channel. My name is Bryndís. Today we're going to talk about my reading for in 2024, and I'm going to go over my top 10 books that I read in 2024. And I also have two honorable mentions, and I could have done like a list of 50 books because I read so many good books in 2024, but I've narrowed it down and we're going to talk about 10 of them. It was so difficult to just keep to 10 books, and I couldn't do it. So that's why I have two honorable mentions that I need to talk about. Firstly, there is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is a Greek mythology retelling, or not a retelling really. It is a retelling. So it's about Circe, who is like a nymph, I think, something like that. And if you know Greek mythology, you know that she was, exiled to this island, and Odyssey, what is that his name? Odysseus comes to the island, and things happen. And I think that I read the Song of Achilles as well this year. Loved it. This one I loved even more. I just think that I don't know, there was just something about the tone of the voice in the story, in the narrative, that just spoke to me, and I absolutely loved it. And then also I read Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, and I thought it was just magnificent. It's such a beautiful story. The writing, there isn't really a lot that happens in the story, but just the narration of it, and just I had to mention it as well. But now we're gonna go into the top 10 of all of the thousands of books it feels like I read in 2024. In number 10, we have a novella. I think it's a novella rather than a short story, but it is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. This was just beautiful. Beautiful. It is this beautiful story of the relationship between this old man and a young boy. He is a fisherman, and he is like trying to survive on very like little money and little food. And this little boy, or a young boy, really is, I don't know if he's actually related to him or if he just lives in the same village in Cuba, I think. And it's just, then there is this battle between the old man and the fish that he's, like tuna fish that he's catching. And it is just the writing, it's just so beautiful. And I don't know what I was expecting. I read it because Hemingway won the Nobel Prize in literature in 1955, I think. And I have kind of the unofficial project of reading as many Nobel Prize laureates as I can. So I was very intrigued to read this, and it's very short, obviously, so that was fantastic. And I don't really know what I was expecting, but whatever I was expecting, this like surpassed it thousandfold. It's so beautiful, and I cannot recommend it like more than I'm doing. You have to read it. It's so good. I have here also now a short story collection, and this is Dubliners by James Joyce. And this is a collection of 15 short stories. And so I enjoyed all of them. I will say that they are bleak. It's a story of people struggling, living in Dublin at the end of the 19th century. And so it's quite like, it's very much like normal life. It feels like just like snippets of normal life in Dublin, but there's so much miserableness going on there. I mean, it differs between the stories, but some of the stories are just horrifically sad and miserable. But James Joyce's writing is so good. And this is just, I don't know. It just captivated me from the first story, really. And my favorite, my favorite one is, I think, A Painful Case. And also the first story, The Sisters. They were just really good, those two stories. But I enjoyed all of the stories. But it is just beautiful. And it's really, if you just want to get into classics, it's a very good place to start, I think, at least, if you don't mind miserableness. And because they're quite short. Each story is quite short, so you can just read one story and just kind of digest it. But yeah, this collection, it's so good. Now we have another classics, and that is Elizabeth Gaskell's Wives and Daughters. This book also took me completely by surprise. So I'd read Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell, and I'd read also some of her short stories and her biography of Charlotte Bronte. So I enjoyed her writing. But this book was so good. So it's her last book that she wrote, so it's actually not finished. I didn't know that going into it. But it's basically only the last maybe one or two chapters that she was not able to finish. But you can kind of know how it ended. Although it would have been nice to have seen it written in her, like seen her write the ending. Although I think you kind of can figure out how it ended. Oh, it is. I just really enjoyed the character like building, the relationship between the characters, the relationship between daughter and father, and then the daughter being this kind of there are like instances of like moral dilemmas that she is facing, but she's just really kind, and I don't know. I can't even describe. I just loved it so much. And I think that this is also an excellent book to read if you're wanting to get into classics, even though it's not a finished book. It is a little bit long, maybe. But yeah, it's just one of those books that I just read and it just brought me joy. It was just joy reading this book. And yeah, I loved it so much. I have another Victorian literature here, and this is Wilkie Collins's The Woman in White. I think I have like five of my books here are Victorian, English Victorian literature, because I dove into Victorian literature in 2024 and I loved it so much. Anyway, so The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins was not at all what I was expecting. I thought it was some supernatural type of a woman in white, like a ghost story or something, but it's not. It's a mystery. It's like a crime mystery, basically. That's what Wilkie Collins does, apparently. This was fantastic. So it's a very easy and light read, even though it's quite long, and there are some heavy topics in there, for sure, like domestic violence in a way, and mistreatment of women, for sure. But it's just, he does it in a way that is just fun and easy to read, I think. I'm used to reading classics, so maybe it's easy to me. But I think that this is a good book to begin if you want to get into classics, I think I can see that this might be a good book to start with. Even though it's long, like I said, but it's just fun, and the main character of Walter Hartwright, and then the two sisters are just fun characters. The villain, the Count something, I can't remember, such a good villain, and I just hated him, but he was just so good in his role as a villain. And this is, for the most part, I think, an epistolary novel. So there's a lot of letters and diaries, or mostly letters. There are some letters in there for sure. And I just had so much fun reading this book, and I just devoured it, really. It was excellent. Excellent book. So number 7 on my list is actually an Icelandic book. This is Salka Valka by Halldór Laxness, the Icelandic Nobel laureate. I debated a lot about whether I wanted to put some of the Halldór Laxness books here, because a lot of them were my favorite, and I ended up actually putting 2 of them on my top 10 list because they were just so good. These are available in English translation and several other languages, so you will be able to maybe find it somewhere if you're interested in reading it in your language. But Salka Valka was actually a reread for me, and I would not generally put a reread on this list because I like to think of this because if I would do that, then it would just be Lord of the Rings and Jane Austen, basically. Those are all my all-time favorite books, and Agatha Christie. So I have no rereads on this list. These are just first reads. But this was technically a reread, but I read it as a teenager, and I had kind of forgotten about what it was about. So it was basically a first read for me. But Salka Valka takes place in the early 1930s or late 1920s in a small village, or fishing village in Iceland. And it's basically the story of kind of the battle of the very poor working class people who are trying to improve their lives, fighting against the system of the rich merchant class in Iceland, who is trying to keep the poor down so that they can still keep on becoming rich, basically. It's the everlasting battle of the rich and the poor. And the injustice, the social injustice that just drove me crazy. But it's so well done. So the main character is Salka Valka, that's her name, or her nickname really. And it just tells her story from when she's about 9 or something like that until her adult years. So it is so good. Oh my God. It made me cry. It made me furious, and made me just wish that things were better today than they were 100 years ago in regards to social justice. It was so good. And yeah, it's one of my in my top 2 of Halldór Laxness books so far, at least. Now we are in the top 5, and this was so difficult because I feel that almost all of these books could have been number 1. And I did consider just not putting numbers on them and just talking about all of these books. But then I decided, okay, I'm going to put numbers on them. So yeah, it doesn't feel 100% right because number 5 is Piranesi. This book is a masterpiece. Like, oh my God, it blew my mind. I went into it completely blind, and I recommend that you do that. Don't Google what it's about, or don't read too much or think about too much about what it's about. Just go and read it if you haven't already. I'm very excited to read more by Susanna Clarke. And this book, it was just the writing, so beautiful. The tone, the voice, the storytelling, the character creation, the world building, and oh my God, it blew my mind. It was so good. I devoured this book. It's not very long, and I just absolutely loved it. It was, and I keep thinking, I'm still thinking about it. Like I read it in, I think, May, and I'm still thinking about it several months later, because it was just absolutely just joyful and just so good, and like, yeah, captivating, I think is a word. So book number 4 is another Halldór Laxness book. It is Independent People. I don't have the physical copy of that. It's the only one that I don't actually own a physical copy of yet. I will own it at some point, for sure. So Independent People is probably his most famous work. It has been translated into all of the languages. So I'm sure if you would be interested, you can find it somewhere. And it is the story of Bjartur, who is basically a peasant. He wants to be a independent farmer, and so he moves with his family to this, and basically a ruin of a house or of a dwelling, and he tries to make survive basically, and has a few sheep, I think, and I think he then at some point gets a cow and maybe a horse. He has a dog, and he's married and has children, and there are, it's a thing. Halldór Laxness is very good at taking these things from that is kind of ingrained into Icelandic culture and making it visible and making it just so, it just hits you, just like, yes, exactly. And it's just so good. The story itself is also just very beautiful and very well written. He was such a good writer. And I don't know how it is in the translations, but in the Icelandic, his use of language, his use of Icelandic, and it's a masterpiece. It's just beautiful, and I highly recommend this book. Number 3 is Middlemarch by George Eliot. This is a chunky book, and I read it in March, and I absolutely loved it. It was, the top 3 was very tight. And at some point in the year, this one was on my favorite book of the year. And then it kind of went to number 2, but then it ended up as number 3. But Middlemarch is excellent. It's a very long book, and there are some sections in this book that are very slow. And I think at least in this book, for George Eliot, the kind of pacing of the storyline is kind of not necessarily the best. I don't know, maybe it's because it was originally serialized, so it was published in like chunks, not like as a book. So maybe that's why, but I didn't find that to be off-putting or a negative thing. I just really enjoyed the story. And there are a couple of like different storylines. It follows, what's her name again? Oh my goodness. Dorothea? For parts of the story is Dorothea's story with her, how she imagines her marriage to be. And then it's a lot of young women wanting to get married in this book, and how they envision their marriage life in a different ways, like differently, and how their marriage life evolves differently, and kind of what is important when you are choosing a husband for a woman in the Victorian period. Yeah, I really liked it. It was just very enjoyable. I really kind of enjoyed most of the storylines, actually all of the storylines, and it was just really fun to read. And I'm so happy because I was very scared to read this book. it is huge, and it's also George Eliot. And I feel I've been intimidated by her. But now that I've read Middlemarch, which I think is one of her biggest books, I think definitely her most famous book, I feel that I can read George Eliot easily. So that's definitely good. But I would not necessarily recommend this book if you're not used to reading classics. But if you are used to reading classics and you haven't read Middlemarch, you need to do that. 100% recommend. Okay, so number 2 on my list, after being on number 1 from January until August. This was the first book that I read in 2024, and it is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. OMG, this book is so good. Obviously, I've heard about this book forever, and I think I've at some point seen a movie adaptation, although I can't quite remember that. But this book took me by surprise as well in a very positive way. It follows Jane Eyre, who is the main character, from her childhood when she loses both of her parents, and she goes to live with her uncle and his wife and their children. Her uncle then dies, so she's basically raised by her aunt or her uncle's wife, who doesn't like her at all. She's mistreated, and then she goes very young to live at a boarding school, basically. And after that, she goes to work as a governess, and, things happen. There's a mystery element to it, and there's a love story. Obviously, it's an epic love story. And it's just absolutely wonderful. Charlotte Bronte's writing is fantastic. I will say that if you want to read, like I did, all of her books, she published 4 novels, Charlotte Bronte. I read all of them. I read all of the Bronte sisters in 2024. I would not start with this one, because this is her best. This is her best book. This is her masterpiece. So I will start with the other 3 and then end with this one. So you can end with a cherry on top, basically. But this is good. The writing is excellent. The kind of the pacing, the storyline, the characters. It's just such a good book, and I absolutely love it. My most favorite book of 2024 is also the most difficult book that I've read in my life, and that is A Man Called Uwe by Fredrik Backman. And you would, if you haven't seen my August wrap-up, you would probably wonder, why is this book the most difficult book that you have read if you have been reading like Les Miserables and you've read War and Peace and Middlemarch and like crazy books like that. And it's because of the emotional impact that this book had on me. Now, I will say that I didn't realize what this book was about, or like the different kind of elements of this book. And I have lost loved ones to suicide and to cancer, and that those are parts of this book. So if you are dealing with that, having lost loved ones to suicide and to cancer, just know that going into this book, it triggered my grief so much. I cried I have not cried this hard since the day that my loved ones passed away, basically, from reading this book. Oh my God, it was so difficult. But having said that, the way that Fredrik Backman writes, the way he tells a story, it is so beautiful. It just it just transported me into the book. It was just amazing. I don't know if I wouldn't have those personal grief history, maybe this book would not have been as impactful on me. Thankfully, I'm in a pretty good place emotionally and with my grief, that it was a healthy book for me. I read it. It was a healthy thing for me to kind of, explore my grief through this book, I suppose. It didn't cause me to go into depression, it wasn't a negative. It was horribly difficult, but in a good way, in a healing way, so to speak. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that it was something that I really needed to kind of just let go of some things that I'd been kind of battling with, which is normal things that you do when you're dealing with grief. So, oh my God, this book, it is just, and there are so many funny little things in this book that is just, so it's still funny, but also so sad and so heart, wrenching. This book, yeah, it was fantastic. So those were my top 10, plus the 2 extra books that I read in 2024. Excellent reading year, like I've already said. Found so many good books, so many 5 stars and 4 stars. It was just, in general, I just was very lucky with all the books that I chose to read. There were very few books that I didn't like. So that's fantastic, right? That's really fantastic. I hope that 2025 will be as good. It's going to be different because in 2024 I had several projects that I was reading for, and I'm not going to do that in this year. Just going to read, mostly mood read, but also focus on my physical TBR, and that's going to be interesting as well. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. If you have read any of these books, please let me know in the comments and we can have a chat. If you disagree with some of my ranking or whatever, I would love to hear that as well. And thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one. Bye.